So Madden's franchise mode is not terrible, but it is definitely not great. The more you dig into it and the further you get, the more headaches and warts start to show. Fortunately, there is a way to run a decently realistic franchise, but you're going to have to do a little bit of extra work and do some extra steps. This video is going to show you some ways to make your franchise a little bit more immersive, fun, and give it some longevity. We are going to want to set up 32 team roster control for the first step for a few things we do before we start our games. So just do a franchise as normal, choose the one team you want to be. So start playing preseason, doesn't matter, doesn't really matter. Setting up 32 team takes a little time, but it's easy. Go to options, user teams, where it says new character. You're going to want to go to each team and just add the coach. So start playing, and you'll see, go back to options, user teams. So you have two. So you want to do that for all 32 teams. It's going to take a few minutes, but get that all set up and you can move on to the next step. Okay, so I'm sure most people know how to navigate these menus and do the basic things, but I'm going to assume that you don't and just tell you everything. So I have set up all 32 teams to be controlled. As you go into user teams, you can see. So let's just go into pick a different team. Let's see. Let's go with the Jaguars. All right, so switch to this character. Now, what you're going to want to do for each team, this is important if you want good stats and real immersion, is set up formation subs for running backs. As we know, there's very few three-down backs in the NFL, Christian McCaffrey and a couple others. Most are, a 60-40, even a 50-50, sometimes a 33-33-33 split between three guys. But if you played any franchise games, you know the computer is going to run their starting running back 99% of the time. There's going to be a ton of 1,500 yard per season rushers, and that's just not a realistic thing anymore. So formation subs, especially if a team has a power back and a receiving back. I know Jacksonville likes to run Tank Bigsby, Travis Etienne pretty evenly. To set that up, you go into formation subs and you just pick some different subs here and, go through. So you got Etienne starting pretty much everywhere. Just, pick, let's see, what do we got here? A strong eye. That's probably going to be more of a Tank Bigsby thing. So just go in there and make sure you put in your backup here and there to get those guys equal reps or whatever percentage you want. There's enough data out there that you can kind of tell who's getting the carries and you can tailor it towards real life or whatever you want. But that's a good way to get these backup running backs into the game. Now, even if a player gets injured, these formation subs are going to stick the entire year, whether you retire your user character or not. If you go into depth charts and redo depth charts, as soon as you retire that character, they're going to revert back to what it was before. So unless you're really wanting to get in there and do hardcore simulation sims for 32 teams, which I'm not. I don't have that time anymore. Maybe a few years ago. Formation subs is the way to go to get those running backs some equal carries. It's going to be a little time consuming, but fortunately you only have to do that one time before week 1 of the season. So that's one thing you definitely want to do for each team. So after that, you are free to do anything else you'd like to do before you start the season. If you're really a psychopath, you can cut all the players on the practice squad and go through each team and re-sign their actual practice squad players, since it's going to be a randomized mess. I thought about doing that very slightly, but decided I don't have the time or patience to do that anymore. You can also go through and make any trades or cuts or additions you want to for any team, but I will talk more about that later as the season goes on. So right now, you're going to want to go into your user teams and retire the coaches that you're not going to be controlling. So, if you want to play more than one team in your franchise, you're welcome to do that. I only run one team. So to retire everybody else, you go back into the user teams, you go to actions, You go to switch to the character, sorry. Go back to options and retire. Now, that's going to sound scary. No, Andy Reid is not going to retire. He's going to remain the coach of the Chiefs. You're just not going to be controlling that team anymore. You can go back in at any time and go back into user teams, new character, and go ahead and, if you want to, you can pick them right back up again. So after you do your formation subs and any other preseason moves you want to make, retire all coaches except the team that you are going to control. Unless, of course, you want to run your franchise a little differently. You can go into franchise settings, league settings. Now, unfortunately, this isn't like NBA 2K where you can set up a CPU profile and toggle things between auto and manual. This is going to be for every team, but down here, see, you can set these to auto, but it's going to be every team, including the one that you were playing as. So, I mean, it gives you some options to run this franchise as deep or as shallow as you want to, but I don't have time for that. So I am going to retire every coach except for the Dolphins, the team that I am using. I've simulated ahead a few weeks, as you can see. So during the season, you don't have to run all the teams, but you're going to want to pay attention to how these guys are doing. So I looked and I see that the Cleveland Browns right now, they're 0-7. They're pretty much a mess right now. They're going to want to work towards the future a little bit. So the computer in Madden's trade logic, as you might expect, is pretty terrible. This isn't quite the NBA or Major League Baseball where teams just sell off a bunch of guys, but trades do happen. You're going to want to stay on top of that. So Cleveland might want to get, a couple more draft picks. So I'm going to select Cleveland as one of my teams. And just go through their roster and see if they're going to maybe make a trade or not. So go to manage roster. You can see any upcoming free agents that are more likely to not be a part of the team's long-term plan. Let's see. Who do we have? Nick Chubb is an upcoming free agent. He might be someone that you look to trade away. Amari Cooper, 90 years old in the last season of the last year of his contract. They signed Jerry Jeudy to be their longtime WR1. So Cooper would be a good player that you could look to trade. So let's see what we can get for him. I have a pretty good idea of how all these teams are set up because I've done so much work in here. So do you see any good teams that might need some receiving help? Let's see. The Ravens are a little short on receivers. The Bills, that could be a good matchup. They're 6-1. They don't have a real good WR1 right now. So let's go ahead and see if we can work out a trade between these two teams. Now, you know how to fleece the computer in trades, so it's up to you to have restraint, especially if it's your own team, and make a realistic trade. Let's see. So I think they could probably get, a third-round pick for Cooper. That sounds like it could be something realistic. So let's go ahead and make a trade. They're going to trade Cooper, who's in the last season or the last year of his contract, to Buffalo. Buffalo needs a receiver. Doesn't say they do, but we're going to go ahead and assume they do because look, they don't have anybody near as good as Cooper on the team. So, like I said, a third-round draft pick. Will that work? There you go. Oh, you're not going to want to go overboard with trades, but just go ahead and keep an eye on your franchise and see how all the teams are doing and hop in at any time, make a deal or two. Go back to your user team at any time and go ahead and just... Oh, I already have him selected. and retire the guy when you're done. And there you go. You gave Cleveland an extra third-round pick. That can be done during the offseason as well, but I'll get to that later. So during the regular season, you don't have to do much, but always keep an eye on these teams and make some deals when it needs to be done. You can also go ahead and check out some other teams that are players ready to negotiate. And if you see their salary cap is a little bit of a issue, like I know the Dolphins don't have salary cap room, you can go into any team and try to restructure some contracts and kick the can down the road a little bit, as you would say. The way to go to do that is go back into manage sorry. I'm doing this live. Manage roster, team salaries, and scroll down, see where it says view player card, the bottom left. If you keep scrolling down, Dolphins don't really have, they're pretty much in a salary cap nightmare situation right now. But okay, here we go. If you see someone that you can restructure their contract, click the corresponding button. Like you probably know from the video I made last year, you can clear up some space right now, but it's going to mess up your stuff in the future. So that's a risk-reward type thing. If you need to sign some players, if you see the other teams need to do the same thing, go ahead and do that. Now, another thing that I give myself a self-imposed rule to make things more realistic. This is courtesy of Armor and Sword, their sliders and franchise tips over at Operation Sports. He's pretty much the pro when it comes to this kind of stuff. You're going to want to let one player 80 overall or higher walk as a free agent every year. That happens in real life all the time, and it just gives you a little bit more immersion and a little bit more realism. It's easy to circumvent and just re-sign all your guys and load up and get hot, get a super team. It's so easy. So to give yourself a few self-imposed rules to make things a little more realistic, like if I had the cap space, I would probably re-sign Holland and let Jordan Poyer become a free agent. He'd be my 80 overall player. But the Dolphins' salary cap situation is trash, and I probably won't be able to re-sign Holland even if I tried to make some room here and there. So that's some stuff you can do during the season. Not quite as involved as the preseason or the offseason, but keep an eye on teams that are good or bad. Make a few trades here and there so you can give these teams some additional draft picks. Okay, so I am now in the offseason. This is the point where I'm once again able to make trades and sign free agents and things like that. There's a couple things you can do here. I selected the worst team, which is the Cleveland Browns, who finished 0-17. So they are going to want to really make some moves to try to get things back on track. One thing you're going to want to do for each team for sure is cut players that are making too much money and not producing. We know salary cap cuts happen all the time in the real NFL, but the computer doesn't really do that. They'll let these guys just sit on the roster forever, sucking up the salary cap. So a good way to do is just to go into the roster, sort by savings, so you can see you can get a nice, well, the Browns don't really have much, but the penalty is killer. You're going to want to find someone who has a good, savings to penalty ratio. I don't really see anybody on that roster. Let me scroll a couple, see if there's anybody worth, there you go. You can cut him and save $4.5 million and not have a penalty if you cut Noah Fant, who looks like he was traded. But let's go back to the Browns. How are we going to fix this mess? 0-17. Deshaun Watson is terrible. That penalty is a killer, but as we saw with the Broncos, they moved on from Russell Wilson and just dealt with it. I'm going to do the same with Watson. Click on him. I'm just going to release the guy. Yeah, that good cap room. That penalty sucks hard, but Cleveland has the first overall pick, and they're in a good position to draft a quarterback. So, Watson, you're gone. So now their quarterbacks are sitting with nobody. They may sign someone in free agency. We'll go ahead and get to that point later on. I think if they're the worst team in the NFL, they are going to draft a quarterback. But yeah, anyway, go through each team, clean up the salary cap situation, release some players that have bad contracts and can get you some savings in that salary cap, get you those sweet, sweet dollars. Make any more trades that you might feel necessary before the free agency period starts. Okay, so another thing you can do if you choose is to control all 32 teams during the draft. I did not do that. I simulated the draft, and we had quarterbacks like Jalen Milroe going in the second round and immediately becoming a starter, a 73 overall starter. Not terribly realistic. The Browns, like I mentioned earlier, were 0-17. They did not draft a quarterback first overall. They drafted Will Johnson, who was a very highly rated cornerback. That probably is not real life accurate, but at some point you got to just accept the fact that it's a video game. So how much in-depth work do you want to do? I do not want to draft every single player in the draft because that would make scouting pointless and it would just be too much. So the last step you want to do before you officially begin your new season is simulate to the preseason, which I have done. And you want to go through and look at each roster, see how they look. I picked the Jets, for example, because I know they are a mess. So quarterback, as you see, they have nobody rated higher than a 68. I mean, Aaron Rodgers retired. They didn't have a backup, and they chose not to draft anybody. So that is kind of realistic. I guess you would have trouble replacing Rodgers if you don't draft anybody. But I'm going to go ahead and try to trade them a quarterback that's 70 overall if I can. Well, I'm going to go through and see if there's any other teams out there that are hoarding quarterbacks. So let's just go ahead and go into the trade center. Trade finder, and let's just see if there's any teams that have a backup that can be traded. Let's see. Who do we got? All right, give me a second. See what I got here. Actually doesn't look too bad. I don't see anybody who signed a couple of high backup quarterbacks. It looks pretty good to me, actually. You see these teams have clear starters and clear backups. Okay, well, they could trade for Kirk Cousins. So Michael Penix might be ready to start. Let me see. That salary cap hit is a freaking nightmare, but the Jets may be desperate enough to do that. Let's see if they can get something for Cousins. It would probably be just a mid-round draft pick, a third rounder. Oh, they already do not have a third rounder in 2026. So let's see if they can do maybe a 2027 third rounder and a 2026 fourth rounder. I don't know if the salary cap will match up with that. Let's see what we got. Do you want to offer that trade offer? Okay, the Falcons do not want to give up Cousins for that little bit of compensation. How desperate are the Jets? Let's see, a couple of second rounders. I mean, it's the Jets. They're always desperate. Will that work? Okay, so there you go. Now the Jets have Kirk Cousins as their starting quarterback. All right. Okay, he's still rated 78 overall. I guess a couple of second rounders is worth it. They probably could have even squeezed a first rounder out of it, depending on how desperate they are. Quarterbacks usually fetch first round picks. So, okay, so you want to go through the rosters and make sure everything looks pretty even. Let's just take a look at the Jets. Obviously, they signed a lot of UDFAs and they have a lot of players. This is preseason, so they usually have their 75-man roster set up. Another thing I do, I like to go through and look at the wide receivers and see the jersey numbers. As you know, may or may not know, receivers usually don't use, numbers in the 80s very often anymore. This video right here is all about immersion and realism, so you may not care about this kind of stuff, but I do. So if I see guys in the 80s, I'll just give them a number here and there. So, I mean, as in-depth as you want to get with that, it depends. That stuff's not all that important. But another thing you want to do, the last thing, you want to make sure that the players that have been added to the roster are in correct positions when it comes to a 3-4 or a 4-3 defensive alignment. So I know the Jets run a 4-3, so you just want to go through and make sure, you know, that you don't have a 6'3", 250-pound guy playing defensive end in a 3-4 alignment. You want to move him to outside linebacker. This team looks pretty set up pretty well. All right, you could probably move him. I mean, I know for a fact that I created the guy. He's a pass rusher. You could move him in if you wanted to. Let's take a look at the defensive ends. See, this is another team that just doesn't have much depth right here. All right. Okay, that's fine. So if the Jets happen to sign somebody who played 3-4 for the Dolphins, Zach Seiler, he's a 3-4 defensive end. Jets signed him. You might want to move him inside tackle. That'll probably boost up his ratings a little bit more as he'll fit in better with what the team has already. So, yeah, I mean, where did I just see Chase Young? Okay, so let's look at this another thing you can look at. All right, you see left end, how they just have a 71 overall and a 69 overall. And on this side, you got 87, 84, 75, 73. I'm going to go ahead. You're going to assume that Hassan Reddick is going to be one of the starters. So just go ahead and move him over to left end. Just balance out that a little bit better. The depth chart usually does a good job of starting the best players, but it's more visually appealing for me to see an 84 on this side and an 87 on this side. So that's just, and plus, now you got 3 left ends on the roster, you got 3 right ends on the roster. You can do the same for, let's see, you got a 72, 81, and a 74. That's fine. But, you can do the same for outside linebackers. See, there's a 65. Here you got 86 and a 69. I don't know. But, yeah, move guys around. If this Jets team doesn't really have much depth at all, I don't see very many players over 70. But enough rambling. I've talked a lot. I'm going to go ahead and end this video pretty soon, give you a couple little outro tips and pointers. But before starting your season, you're going to want to go through each team and just do that house cleaning, move some guys around. Offensive line. Let's see how their offensive line looks. So, yeah, see, I probably would have cut Tyron Smith because it looks like Fashanu is ready to be a starter this year. Or you can move him over. Let's go ahead and do that. All right, so let's move him over to right tackle. We'll keep Tyron Smith around one more year. So move him over to the right side. Now you got a 92 at left tackle, and you got yourself a 81 at right. So it's just more balance. Looks better on paper. So do that for each team. Little house cleaning here and there. You can be as anal as you want. If you see rookies that don't look like they belong, you can make a trade and, just do whatever you can to make this stuff look a little better. Make the players match up with the defensive schemes. A 3-4 defensive line is going to have guys that are 290 pounds and above. So if you see a 6'3", 250-pound defensive end for the Steelers, for example, you're going to want to move him to outside linebacker. So a bunch of little things like that. I know I threw a whole bunch at you guys, and it seems like quite a bit to digest at once, but this video is an entire franchise year condensed down. You're going to be playing your games in progressing normally through the season. So these are just some tips and tricks to help make your franchise a little bit more immersive, realistic, and fun. You can be as involved as you want to, or you can let the computer handle everything. It's totally up to you. This is just what I do, and I thought I would share it with you guys. Let me know in the comments if there's anything you do that's unique or special or brings you enjoyment, and let the community know. And thanks everybody. I'll talk to you next time.